Yellow civil engines here, ready to ignite in a 3D drone, making transportation right. Visualizing dreams.
Welcome to video 2 of the Civil Engine tutorial series as part of BeyondCAD University. In this video, we're going to cover importing and texturing base models. And Civil Engine base models created in SketchUp and InfraWorks serve as foundational layers for high-quality photorealistic visualization. These preliminary designs are refined and detailed in Civil Engine with realistic textures, 3D assets, lighting, and interactive elements, transforming them into immersive visualizations that enhance project presentations and stakeholder engagement. As a note, we will not be covering base models outside of SketchUp and InfraWorks workflows as part of this video series, but there are a number of other workflows that do work, including Open Roads Designer, and we hope to produce content on those workflows in the future. Above all, we do recommend downloading and using the free trial of Civil Engine prior to purchasing so that you can make sure that Civil Engine works with the base models for your project files before you get far into this new visualization engine. Also, as a note, we're going to cover the basics of importing and texturing. If you want more in-depth and deep dives into how you can do more advanced base modeling, import, and texturing, I recommend the Civil Visualizing with Sam series. And also, I've linked a webpage on our website called Civil Engine Base Modeling Best Practices, and that's where you can learn the exact settings and other parameters that you need to set to make sure that you get the best experience when you export and import your base models. And then finally, the file types supported in Civil Engine are FBX and OBJ at this point. In the future, we may add other file types or other integrations like Datasmith, but for now, we've specifically chosen to focus on FBX and OBJ as they tend to give the best experience for importing and texturing base models. All right, let's get started. All right, our number one recommended platform for base models is SketchUp Pro. We understand that not everyone has access to or the experience to use SketchUp. We do offer consulting services where we can do base modeling for you, so reach out to us at the contact us page at beyondcad.com. But if you are able to get in a file into SketchUp, you probably will get the best results importing into Civil Engine. For now, we're going to show a very basic example. So let's say that we want to create a square, and this is 10 feet by 10 feet. One of the most important things you need to understand with your base model in SketchUp is that it should be close to or at the point of origin, which is 0, 0, 0, and is also here. So sometimes you may import objects from ORD or Infraworks or Civil 3D. They may be way far away from the point of origin. You're gonna have a lot of trouble bringing them into Civil Engine if that's in the case. In the future, we do hope to get better global georeferencing features, but for now, getting your base model close to the point of origin is gonna give you the best results. All right, so we have our 10 by 10 and now we're gonna do 10 feet up. And so now we have a cube on all sides. When you have your base model, you need to make sure as much as possible that your faces are flipped the right way. So you can reverse faces, you can right click, and when it's reversed, you'll see that it's kind of a grayish blue texture. You want everything to be white if you're using the default texture as part of SketchUp. Sometimes you may not understand this because there are textures applied to your base model already, and you'll only notice that after you import into Civil Engine. If that's the case, you may have to fix all the flipped faces and re-import before moving forward any further in Civil Engine. All right, so let's just do some basic texturing here. All right, so we have our materials here. Let's just use different colors and try and use as much contrast as possible. All right, so we've got all of our faces with textures, and in your base model you do need to have textures applied because that's how we're going to apply the more realistic textures that are available in the material library in Civil Engine. Okay, so now we're ready to export. As a note, the drop down, I'm using two screens, so the drop down is showing up on the other screen, but I'm going to export 3D model, and now we can see here we have our choice, OBJ and so on. Again, we support OBJ and FBX, so we need to make sure that it is set to that. So we want to just do square and then open our options. You can test around with these again, and we recommend making sure these workflows work with your own data before importing. But if you're simply working in SketchUp, you'll probably have the best experience if you have export texture maps selected. And then we want to just leave units as centimeters, as long as that matches up in our units in Civil Engine. So let's do OK. And very quickly, we know that we have 6 faces, 6 materials. This is pretty basic. The more complex you get, obviously, we're going to get much higher numbers. All right, so now we're in Civil Engine. This is the Getting Started screen. And you can import base models after you're in the Getting Started screen, but you'll probably have the best experience if you do it from here. So we want to go to Import Base Model here, and then we want to find our file. You need to make sure it's set to OBJ, and then you'll see we have square here. You can see we can change the name, and we want to make sure that this is set to centimeters because that's what we exported it as. Most of the rest of these can be set as defaults, but again, you can do your own testing based on your own 3D base models. All right, so let's do finish import. And that happened very quickly because it was so small. If you have larger files, that may take longer to import. And again, because I was at the point of origin, 0, 0, 0, the camera was able to find the base model. If you have the base model far away from the point of origin, you're probably going to struggle as far as that goes. All right, so there's 2 ways to import in Civil Engine. One is as a base model, you can see here on the import panel, which we have here. The other is as an asset. Both of them support OBJ and FBX imports. The difference is when you import an asset, it behaves a little bit differently by design. So let's say that we want to do the square, and we're going to rename this and call it square asset. Leave the same settings, do finish import. And now it doesn't show up as a base model, but it is here in the panel. So now we can drag it around and we can place it in our scene just like any other asset from our library. This isn't how base model works. This is how imported assets work. So we've placed it here. We can move that around. And then the other key difference between the base model and the asset, when we're placing other assets or other nodes, like for example of a path, the base model is going to respect that. So let's find a tree, see how we can place the base model on the tree on the base model, but on the imported asset, it doesn't do that. So this is again by design, and that's because we want base models to be the base. We want that to be asphalt, concrete, soil, possibly other elements like striping. But then the imported assets, we want that to be used for things like light poles or park benches or specific assets for your project. And so just be mindful when you're importing stuff, do you want to import it as a base model or do you want to import it as an imported asset? Imported assets also show up here, and we can place a lot of them like this, whereas base models, they just show up that one time whenever you import them. Also, when you import a base model, it's going to show up in the hierarchy under base models. So we can see here all of those different textures. Whereas the asset, it's only going to show up if we place it in the 3D scene like so. So if we delete all those, that still exists in our import panel, that square asset, but there's nothing in the hierarchy because the hierarchy only shows assets that have been placed in 3D space. So the first thing to note is that when you first import a surface, you won't see the thumbnails here. That's a known issue. So what you need to do is just save the file and load it again, and they'll show up. All right, so I saved the file. I didn't even have to reload, and now all the textures are here. You can see here in our scene, we've got a simple cube, and you just want to click the import panel over here and the texture tab. You can see this is still in beta, but you can either pick from surface where you click it and then you'll see some attributes about it, or you can select the material that you want from the thumbnail and then you simply click the face and it will show up. So we could do this for any of our textures to very quickly apply to our base model. If we want to apply a tint to it, what we need to do is go to tint, and let's say we want to do a green bike lane. We can apply the tint there, and now when we apply it again, it's going to have the tint applied to it. So it's not going to apply the tint to previously placed textures, but it will after the fact. You can also import your own image file by going to Import New. And let's say that we wanted to import this, for example. It took a minute, but it did import it. And now you can see those are very small. And we can also make a few adjustments to there. So right now we want to make it 0.01, and now we can adjust that scale. We can also adjust the rotation. There are a few more parameters for adjustment for imported textures versus the material library as part of Civil Engine, but we do plan to add more features in the future as part of this overall system. All right, so let's say that we have multiple pieces that we want to import as part of our base model. Maybe we want to import a bridge separately because we're doing a construction phasing sequence. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make a few other cubes. And then let's change the texturing of these so that we can differentiate them once we import them in. So in this scenario, what you want to do, because these will export and import relative to each other, relative to the origin point. So if we want to import this piece separately, then we're going to go to File, Export 3D Model, and let's do square red. And then this is important. We want to do export only current selection. Everything else we want to keep the same. And then let's do the same for green. All right, so now let's go back into Civil Engine, and we want to go to Import, Base Models, Import New, make sure we're selecting OBJ, and then we want to select square green, leave the settings as is, finish import, and then we got to go to OBJ again, square red, finish import. So hopefully you can see that these came in relative to the way they were in our base model in SketchUp. So if you are exporting multiple pieces, and this can be very useful again for a scenario like a bridge or buildings or maybe terrain, you can export them all out as part of the same base model, and they will come in the same place in your model in Civil Engine relative to each other, which is very important. If you don't do that, what you need to do is you need to select that base model in the hierarchy, and then you need to manually move it. And in this example, it's going pretty quickly because these are small, but this can be very tedious for large models or large terrain. And so it's best if you can get them to export correctly relative to each other as part of the base model, rather than moving them using either the transform gizmo here, or sometimes you may even have to slide these spin bars over here in the details panel to get it positioned correctly, because you're going to want to make sure that everything is lined up globally where it needs to be, especially until we get better global georeferencing features as part of future versions of Civil Engine. All right, so we're back to just our original square, and we call these, sometimes we'll refer to them as texture faces, but we also refer to them as submesh components. So these can be handled separately in the hierarchy from just like any other asset in other areas of the hierarchy. So if we wanted to turn off one of these faces, and this is actually pretty common. Sometimes you'll have a base model and something will come in that you don't want to be there. You can delete it, but best practice is probably just to turn off that face so that you can reference it by turning it back on again if you need to. You can also, as I just showed, right-click and organize these submesh components into their own folders for better organization. And then you can also assign these their own names. So face 1, face 2, and so on. And this can be extremely helpful when you're bringing in a very complex base model, because sometimes you may bring in a base model with submesh components that have really weird names. So if you realize, okay, this surface is the grass, then you name it grass. This surface is the water, this surface is the concrete, this surface is the new asphalt. You give them the names here. That way, the next time you open up the submesh components in your base model hierarchy, then you're going to quickly be able to reference those and find those. This becomes very important, especially with design files from ORD or from Infraworks. Some of them are going to have hundreds of submesh components, and so the quicker that you can name them, the more efficiency you're going to have in assigning and referencing back those various submesh components. All right, for a more complex example, we've got this diverging diamond interchange provided by our friends over at Ardura. This is one of our example projects. You can look out the full version here by loading it. But I've re-imported this base model, the same as before, and I want to show you kind of the same process that I did before using applying the textures using the paint system. And as a reminder, you can always, and even now, you can still go to the hierarchy, click on the base model tab, click the drop down, and as you select these various surfaces, these submeshes, you can also tab through them. You'll see a details panel show up over here on the left, and you can apply a texture using this system. Still, the system that I'm showing, the paint system, is an augmentation of this. It's just going to add more efficiency to your process. So you can see here I've got the grass surface, and if I want to use the old system, then I can go select grass, and you can see here we've got the grass. There's still also a known issue where you may need to reset the texture to white to make sure that it has that native color. All right, so if we want to use the new paint system, you want to go to the import tab again and texture, and then again you need to save this before the thumbnails show up. So let's go to File, Save As, and now all of the thumbnails show up. And now we can do the same thing by just simply clicking the texture that we want and then pasting it onto our surface. Like this. We can also do some concrete. And then one trick that you want to try out is if there's something that you don't want to see, you could go to the hierarchy, find it in the submesh component, and either disable visibility or delete it. Or you could also just go here and go to transparent, which is one of the textures, and then you can just click it, and then it's just going to make that surface transparent. So it's kind of another way to delete it. I would only use it if you're trying to go really quickly, because one of the issues you'll face with this is if we want to delete these ones, it's still there, and so it's preventing me from selecting that face behind it. Whereas if I went and deleted that face in the hierarchy, it's not going to be there, and so I'll be able to better click on things behind it. So that is a really quick tool, but it's something you should also only use if you're trying to go quickly, with the understanding that things behind it you're not actually deleting it, that you're just kind of disabling the visibility by applying a transparent texture. Anyway, I'll continue through and just keep applying these textures to show how much more efficient this system is. All right, and when you're done, you just want to right click. That's going to take you out of the paint mode. All right, so this is that example project using that same base model that I was showing in SketchUp. And we can turn off all of the placed assets just to give a reference of how that base model will look. We can also do the same with all of our paths, which include our traffic, striping cleanup, trees, and other elements. And so now we can see this is how the base model looks fully textured, as opposed to this is how the base model looked in SketchUp. And so the goal with Civil Engine is you need a base model, you need to export it from wherever the 3D modeling software is that you're using, and then you need to bring it into Civil Engine, where you apply our photorealistic materials from our material library, and then you place assets using the path system, the area system, our 3D asset library, and so on. That is Civil Engine in a nutshell, and that's why base modeling is so essential to get right, because if you can't get your base model to import correctly, then you're not going to get very far as part of this process. Again, there's a series on our YouTube channel and Beyond CAD University called Civil Visualizing with Sam, where I walk through this project and other projects in detail, where you can go through that process and you can see how in just a few hours you can go from base model to fully visualized. And a lot of these were done before we had some of these tools like area brush tools. And so if I were to do this again, it might even be faster. But for the most part, this is kind of the best practices for the export from SketchUp and import into Civil Engine. I'm going to first show you what happens if you use the standard OBJ export, and then show you an alternative. And again, the menu is dropping down on my second screen, but I'm going to export 3D model. This default name is fine. And then options, we want to use these settings, export texture maps, swap YZ centimeters. That's fine. Export. All right, so it is 9:48. I'm just marking the time because I want to see how long it takes to export this. All right, so it's 9:52. So that took 4 minutes to export from SketchUp, and we've got over 1 million different faces. All right, now we need to bring that into Civil Engine. Again, this is the default method, not the method that I'm going to show you, which is preferred. So we want to import base model. We're going to find our file right here. We want to make sure it's set to centimeters and do finish import. Again, I'll check the time. It's 9:53, and we'll see what time it is when it finishes import. All right, so now it's 9:55, probably almost 9:56. So it's 2 to 3 minutes to import this in. And we knew our trees were going to come in this way. That's fine. We can turn them off. The problem is you can see we've got all of these flipped faces. And even when we go to the paint tool in texture, and to access this, you do need to save the file. So let's save the file real quick. All right, so when we save the file, you can see here, if we wanted to get rid of the trees, a quick way is you can just turn them transparent, not preferred, but very quick. But then if I go to texture these, you can see we're having all sorts of issues. If we wanted to do asphalt, it would do the black parts asphalt, but then what about this white stuff? It's blended in with the grass. So we've got so many issues with missing faces and flipped faces and things that are incorrect. All right, so this is the standard method that we've been using and we've been preaching. Sometimes it works, especially for simpler, less complex models, but a lot of times you're gonna have issues. So this is why I'm excited to show this new method. So let's quit Civil Engine and we'll go back into SketchUp and we'll export using the other system. All right, so we have this exact same file as before, but this time we want to go to extensions. Again, this is showing up in my other screen, but it's called Simlab OBJ Exporter, and I will link to this in the video as well. So now we want to do the same thing, OBJ wavefront, but we are going to call this alternative 2, and it's going to do the exact same thing as before, but now you'll see where it took 4 minutes before. Let's see how long it takes this time. And we want to, I think you want to do combine by material. So let's do that. So you can see here down in the bottom right, we've got this exporting model loading screen going on. It's 9:58. We'll see how long this takes. All right, so it's still 9:58. So less than a minute, probably about 30 seconds, we've got our OBJ. So 5 to 10 times faster. So now we have Civil Engine open again. We want to do import base model. We want to select this new one. Let's start, I believe it's meters by default, and we want to do finish import. It is 9:59. All right, so it is now 10 a.m., so less than a minute again, we've got our model. So let's inspect and see what we've got. So again, this is the exact same model, and you can see now there are 0 issues. So this was so much better using this exporter. Credit to Marvin Klassen of Klassen Graphics for giving us a shout out on this. And this is definitely going to be the method that we're going to recommend, especially for large and complex files for getting into Civil Engine. To turn off the trees, we could do the paint and just do transparent, but that's not really turning them off. That's just turning them transparent. They're still there and they'll get in the way. So what we want to do is we want to find them. And again, we got to save our file. Now everything shows up. So if we want to find which surface it is, we can use this picker tool, and you see it says new treed 256. So let's go to our hierarchy and let's find that name. And you can see down here we found new treed 256. So now we could either turn it off. I'm just going to delete it because we definitely don't want those trees. All right, so now we can use the new paint system. We want to go to texture, and we want to select our textures, and this should go pretty quickly. As far as texturing the surfaces, I just selected asphalt cracked light. All right, so now I want to get some grass. Okay, and one thing with this exporter is you can see the UVs are all messed up here, but when we paint them, It's just a really good system workflow with Civil Engine, because when I paint it with this brick texture, we're gonna have no issues with the UV mapping. You can see there. All right, and you can see here as well, with this bike path, we've got a lot of UV issues as well, but we wanna make that reddish. So we have asphalt cracked light, but then tint, we want to make that red. And then once we get it the color that we want, then we can click it, and not only is it going to fix the UVs, but it's also going to do that red texture. As you can see there, I don't love that, so let's make it lighter. And if you're ever done texturing, you can just right click to get out of this dialog box. All right, now I want to cover best practices for exporting and importing base models from Infraworks into Civil Engine. In general, I don't prefer the look of the 3D modeling generated in Infraworks for visualization purposes. I think there are some uses for it in general for planning and so forth. But Infraworks can be useful in other scenarios like collecting terrain, or we've seen a lot of our customers use it for Civil 3D to Infraworks, and then from there to Civil Engine or other 3D visualization engines. And that's where they can add the more realistic trees, traffic, cameras, and so forth. So I do want to cover this because it is going to come up for a lot of our customers. The thing that you need to understand about Infraworks is that there are obviously 2 formats you can import into Civil Engine, FBX and OBJ, but the FBX files don't work from Infraworks, and the OBJ files need some work to be done. So I'll show how that's done. We're not going to worry about FBX. They come in, it's just the aerials are all flipped, and so until we fix that, you need to focus on OBJ. But you want to go to Present Share, click this Share dropdown, and then go to Export 3D Model. And then right here it says Define Interactivity. We could use entire model, or we could do a bounding box. If you use entire model, then it's going to take a long time, and for this example, I just want to keep it short, so I'm going to use a bounding box, and basically it's going to allow me to just select which area I want to choose and which area I want to export. Now we can see here it says single file. This says FBX, so we want to change that. Go to Downloads, go to OBJ, and then here you can export as multiple files or a single file. And so if there are multiple files, like maybe you want the buildings to come in separately, maybe you have trees or bridges or other elements, you can do it that way. For this example, we're just going to keep it as a single file. And then the rest of these, you can just leave them checked for now, and we want to export. All right, so that didn't take too long. So now we need to open Civil Engine, and let's go to Import Base Model. Switch to OBJ, and it's this IM export right here. Let's switch this to centimeters and do Finish Import. All right, you can see here it came in and it's much too small, and so that should have been meters. So let's re-import. Let's go to OBJ, IM export, leave it at meters, and then we're going to need to do a base rotation. Let's do X, Finish Import. Now you can see it came in correctly, although it came up high in the sky. If it did this, we could build everything on top of it, but sometimes you just want to make sure it's lower just so the clouds don't get in the way. And so if I put that at 0, it made it even higher. So let's just go like -3,000. All right, so everything looks and feels like it's the right scale, but again, a quick check on that is just go to place a traffic path, and everything looks fine there. All right, so things are looking pretty much the way we would expect from Infraworks. The problem is the aerials are too dark, and so what we need to do is we need to brighten them up. Again, this is a known issue, something we hope to have more features and tools for in the future. But for now, you can go to base models to do the drop down, and we can go through and find out which aerials those are, so that we can make sure that we fix them and reassign them. All right, so looks like maybe 2 aerials, but this is just the one that's most important, material 36. Let's just rename that aerial so that we can remember it. And then what we need to do is go to our Windows folder structure and find that aerial image. So there should be a folder that came along with your export called textures, and you just need to go through and find which textures those are. It's going to have all the building faces and other things in here, but the ones we're most interested in are these aerials. So we need to open these up in a photo editing tool, and then we just need to go and make sure that we brighten these up. There are a number of ways you can do this. This is just the default Photos app. I did find this tool called PhotoBat where you can do a bunch at the same time. If you have a lot of them, I recommend this. I know this is tedious. It's something we do hope to work on in the future. But for now, we can just do this simply by editing this in the default photo editing in Windows. All right, save. Let's just save that as is, and then go find the other one. All right, so we're back in Civil Engine, and to get those textures applied again, what we need to do is we need to find them, and then you go to Import New. Let's get a better look at this one to make sure we're looking at the right one. There's a big parking lot over here, so change to JPEG. Let's go View, Extra Large Icons, and let's see if it's this one. It was not that one, so let's do the other one. All right, so now we're working with a brighter image. The image quality is not great on this, so hopefully you're working with better aerials in your own base model. But you need to go through and do that for all of the different aerials. And so this one only had one because it's a small one, but we have worked on some that have many more. And you just have to go through one by one, make sure that that image is brightened up, and then re-import it. And the same holds true if you edit anything else about your aerials. Sometimes we will go through and edit aerials to like remove vehicles or trees to get a really good kind of faux base model. And if you do that in Photoshop and you want to re-import it, then you use the same process. You just find it here in the submesh components in the hierarchy, go to Import New, find that aerial, and then re-import it. All right, and then everything else in importing and texturing for Infraworks holds true as it did for SketchUp. You just need to tap through and find the surfaces. A lot of this stuff you may not even want because the buildings don't come in great shape. We could have removed them by exporting as separate files in Infraworks, but if you want, you can just turn those off one by one here in the submesh components. You can see here now we're starting to get some of these other materials. So maybe we want to make this one of the concrete textures. This is one of the asphalt textures. And so over time, you can get everything textured. All right, I wanted to open up this example project to demonstrate the quality and the results that you can get from Infraworks. This is not one of the example projects included in when you download Civil Engine, but if you click on more example projects, you'll find it. It's called Lord's Pass. And this was donated to us by our friends over at VHB. And you can see how this is another, it's an Infraworks based model, just like what we were working with SketchUp, but they have really good quality because they did the modeling in Civil 3D and then they brought it over, I believe, as surfaces or draped surfaces or something in Infraworks. And then this is the level of quality that you can get, especially once we get all the textures applied, we get our traffic in, pedestrians, and so on. This is a work in progress. We don't have all the intersection controllers set up the way that we need to, but with time you can see how you can go from a base model in Infraworks to something much more realistic than what you would typically get out of Infraworks. So I just want to use that as a reference for those that may be interested in testing the Infraworks to Civil Engine workflow, and noting that you can get some really good quality, especially if you work hard to get some good modeling and then import that into Civil Engine and then clean up from there. I didn't go through and lighten up the darkened aerials here, so you can see if they're as is, they're not terrible, but everything is just a little bit darker for some reason when you import as an OBJ from Infraworks, and going through that process of finding those in the submesh component and then brightening them up in image editing, that will give you better results. As a warning, some of these big models, they're just a lot of submesh components, a lot of materials in Infraworks, and so just be mindful that it might be a little bit more tedious to go through this workflow, which is why we recommend SketchUp whenever possible for base models. All right, finally, I just want to go through a very common scenario that is a concern of a lot of users and potential users of Civil Engine, and that is what happens if my design changes? What happens if my base model changes? Do I have to start from scratch? And fortunately, the answer is no. And I want to show how that process works. So we've got this road here in SketchUp as our base model, very basic example, but hopefully you can extrapolate to more complex scenarios. So let's go to File, Export, and let's just do a road section. Shout out to our other product, Beyond Typicals, where you can do road sections like this very easily. Let's say we're doing something like this in Civil Engine. Let's leave the settings as is and export. So very quick, only 112 faces, and let's open Civil Engine. All right, so we're here at the Getting Started screen. Let's go to Import Base Model, find our file, switch to OBJ, and make sure that this is set to centimeters. And now you can see here, we've got our base model. So let's very quickly set up our scene by assigning textures, hierarchy, base model, drop down, submesh components. Let's make this a texture. Let's make this a grass. Let's make this a concrete. And let's make this a different type of concrete. All right, so we've got our nice road here. You can see we have some issues with missing faces, flipped faces, and we can look into fixing that. But for the most part, things are looking fine. So let's add our traffic. Let's add some trees. And let's add some light poles. So we can search here. All right, so very quickly, we've got our beautiful visualization going on here in Civil Engine, but oh no, our project manager just came to us and said, hey, we're gonna widen that median, and it's now gonna be like 7 feet wide. So what are we gonna do? So what we're gonna do is go back to our base model, and let's make that change. So to make that change, again, the goal of this is not to give a full detail of how to do modeling in SketchUp, but essentially we're gonna just quickly pull this out. Let's do this by 5 feet. And then again, those faces were flipped over here. So while we're at it, let's see if we can right click, reverse faces. And then we just want to make sure our textures are appropriate. And actually while we're at it, let's make this entire median concrete as part of this design change. And then fix these flipped faces here. All right, there's some funkiness going on. For the most part, I think you get the point. All right, so everything else we need to leave as is. Export, exact same settings as before. Same export options as before. Export. All right, so now we're back in Civil Engine and we want to re-import this. We currently don't have a way to refresh it. And so what you need to do currently is we can just shut that off. So you can see this is what it looks like when it shuts off. Then we need to go to Base Models, Import New, switch to OBJ, Road Section Revised, leave everything else the same, finish import. So now you can see all we have to do is adjust the assets and then retexture things. And also that flipped face issue, we were able to fix it, which is nice. All right, and if the traffic's ever distracting, you can just shut it off down here at the bottom right and turn off our path visualizers. Okay, so let's get these assets adjusted. And then we need to make sure and retexture everything. So we could turn off, we could delete this first road section, or we can leave it as reference. Like maybe we want to remember which textures we used. We can just leave it there and just leave it off. That's probably the best practice. All right, so let's go through and just reapply the textures. Okay. And then what I would do if I were actually doing this is I would combine these trees into their own folder, name that trees, the tree lights in their own folder, name that lights, lock these guys so those selector icons don't keep popping up, and then turn our traffic back on. Now you can see our traffic's off. We need to get that adjusted as well, which is easy enough. Just go to paths, adjust those nodes. We could, if it's easier, you can just delete these and start from scratch. Either way shouldn't take more than a few minutes depending on the size of your project. And there we go. Now we made adjustments as necessary for the revised base model, the revised design. And so hopefully that's some level of comfort that if your design changes, you don't have to change everything. You just have to retexture your base model after you import it and then adjust your assets. All right, so that wraps up import and texturing as part of this Civil Engine tutorial series as part of Beyond CAD University. My name is Sam Lytle. I'm the lead creator on this project. I'm super excited to have you along with me. I'm excited in the next video to show you all that we can do with assets.
What?